Hello and welcome to another episode of Grammar and Thongs, where today we're going to be talking about inverted commas, which you may know as quote marks or speech marks. Speech marks are those little punctuation marks that we use to surround direct speech to indicate when somebody is speaking in something that we've written. So that's what they're for, and they always work in pairs, even when you're doing little speech marks in the air. So what we're going to concentrate on today is how you use correct punctuation to start a direct speech or a quote, and how you use correct punctuation to finish it, because that seems to be where people get tripped up a little bit. First of all, let's have a look at these examples here. This is a very basic sentence at the top here. I love English, one student said. What you need in between the direct speech and the accompanying clause here is some sort of punctuation. Now, with a simple sentence like this, it's usually just a comma. So we put the comma inside the speech marks. So it always goes inside the speech marks in a sentence like that. But it doesn't have to be a comma. If it's an exclamation, like I love English, another student exclaimed, then you'd have an exclamation mark. Again, it would go inside the quote marks, and it would work in place of the comma. Also, if it was a question, like, do you love English? The teacher asked, then we need a question mark as our punctuation mark. Again, it goes inside the quote marks, and that question mark is now working in place of the comma. But you'll see that they've all got some sort of punctuation at the end of the direct quote, separating it from the accompanying clause. The other way that we can use direct speech is at the end of the sentence, like these examples over here. And then what we need is some sort of punctuation that introduces the direct quote. So in this top example, the student said, comma, I love English. And then we need a full stop at the end. Because I love English is a complete sentence in itself, a short one, but a complete one, the full stop goes inside the quote marks here. And because it's also the end of the whole sentence, then that full stop does both jobs. We don't need another full stop here because that would just look a bit strange. We just have the one, and it does the job of ending the sentence and ending the quoted material. In this second example, it says the teacher asked, do you love English? So again, we've got a comma to introduce our quoted material, but the quoted material is a question, a complete question on its own. Do you love English? So we need a question mark, and the question mark goes with the quoted material, so it goes inside the quote, because that's the question, do you love English? And because, again, that comes at the end of the quote and the end of the whole sentence, that question mark can do the job of both. We don't need another question mark after the quote mark. It's the end of the sentence, that'll do. But what if we've got an example like this one down here, where it says, did the teacher ask if you, quote, loved English? Then we've just got a little part of a sentence here. It's not a complete sentence on its own. And so the punctuation mark at the end goes outside the quote marks here. And it makes sense if you think of it in this way. What is the question? The question is not what's in the quote marks. The question is not loved English. So the question mark doesn't go in the quote marks. The question is the whole sentence. Did the teacher ask if you loved English? And because that's the question mark needs to go at the end of the sentence, not at the end of the quoted material. Now that rule applies for any little fragments or incomplete sentences or words that are quoted. The quoted material is just part of the overall sentence, and so the punctuation goes at the end. So that's what happens at the beginning and at the end of sentences. But what if there is some information that breaks up the direct speech? Well, here's the rule. If direct speech is broken up by information about who is speaking, then you need punctuation to end the first bit of direct speech, and also punctuation to introduce the second piece of direct speech. So the rule's pretty much the same. Here's how it works. Yes, she cried, I love English. So here we've got an exclamation, yes, and so the exclamation mark is part of the quoted material and goes inside the quote marks, and it does the same job as the comma would have if it wasn't an exclamation. So yes, she cried. There's the end of our sentence. And then we've got the same person talking, but this was a complete sentence, and so we have a capital letter to start the rest of the quote, although I would be a capital anyway. I love English, another exclamation mark, and that ends the whole sentence there. Whereas in this case, what the person speaking is saying actually goes across as one sentence, and the attribution about who's saying it is in the middle. So whereas in this case we have these exclamation marks and full stops, here we need commas to show that it's a continuous sentence. So the other day, she said, you told me English was your favourite. The full quote is, the other day you told me English was your favourite. So that's why we've got commas. We have a comma to end the first bit here, but then it's not a full stop here because the sentence continues, and so it's not a capital letter either. It's just opening the quote marks back up and continuing the sentence. And at the end, the full stop finishes the quoted material, and because it also comes at the end of the sentence, does the job of finishing the sentence as well. Okay, a couple more ways that we use these very handy little punctuation marks, inverted commas. We can use them to highlight words. Now sometimes this is what you need in an essay when you want to show that a word or phrase you're using is from another author, so you put it in quote marks. We can use it to show that a word is weird or unusual. That you're indicating to the reader that this is something called this thing that's a little bit strange or, an unexpected word. So you might put a word like zoomorphism in quote marks when you're maybe describing what it is. Zoomorphism is, and then explaining what the literary technique is. And lastly, you might use quote marks to show some doubt or sarcasm in what is being said. So if you had this sentence here, he was too busy to do his homework, sounds like an ordinary sentence, but with the power of the inverted comma, if you put them around the word busy, then we get that doubt, that sarcasm. He was too busy to do his homework. So it's very handy for that. Two more things I want to tell you about. One is single quote marks. So we use double quote marks. Some publications you see may use single quote marks all the time, and really, as long as you're consistent, either way is acceptable in different parts of the world. But here in Australia and in school, we use double quote marks, but we use single quote marks for quotes within quotes. So if you're quoting someone inside your quote, or your character is, then you use a single quote mark for that quote that's inside the quote. As in this example here. He called English the, quote, greatest subject. So these are the words that he used. Now, we've got the end of the sentence here. So let's apply our earlier rules. Greatest subject is not a sentence on its own, so the punctuation doesn't go with the quoted material. And we've got a quote within a quote. So this is where we would need the full stop to come after the quoted material because it's ending the whole sentence. But the whole sentence is a quote, so we also need some more quote marks there. So he called English the, quote, greatest subject, full stop, end of sentence. So we've got a single quote mark and a double quote mark, which is very exciting. And lastly, how we refer to texts, because sometimes we use quote marks there. The rule, at least at our school, is for songs and poems and short stories, we use quote marks. So quote marks are how we refer to these things. Whereas for plays, films and novels, the rule is that we underline. Okay, so that's in essays and any other form of writing. And that's about everything you need to know about inverted commas. Thank you.